Well, good morning and welcome to your morning briefing for Good Friday, the 18th of April, 2025. I'm your host, Mike Shelby. Happy Good Friday to everyone. Let's go ahead and start off with what's going on inside the Beltway. Good morning, Robert. All right, the Republicans came out, a week or two ago and talked about raising taxes on millionaires with the latest here.
So apparently the Senate, House, Republicans, and the White House are drafting plans for this new top tax bracket. And so far, the only hard numbers are in the House plan, and that's a 40% income tax bracket for any individuals earning more than $1 million per year. What I think is interesting about this is that this is projected to actually hit higher income individuals who are not exactly in the Trump and Vance camp. They're talking professionals like lawyers, athletes, doctors, and other high-income professionals, while not actually hitting a lot of the billionaire donors who donated to the Trump campaign and have defected to the Trump camp. What I think is going on here is Republicans are also scrambling to find a way to cover those unfunded tax cuts that Ray Dalio warned about a few weeks ago, because they're trying to get the 2017 tax cuts through and this debt ceiling raised without blowing up the deficit even further than it already has been.
All right. Interesting. And let's move on here to a bipartisan bill. What's the problem with AI election ads?
So this bill, it's called the Protect Elections from Deceptive AI Act, and it includes Susan Collins and Josh Hawley. And they said that this is going to block the use of deceptive AI content in federal election advertisements, but it would provide exceptions for parody, satire, and AI content and news. I think the concern over this is genuine. I've seen a lot of, over the last roughly year, advancement in this AI generated video and audio content. And I think for most people, it's become more difficult to discern at first glance what is AI generated, what is actually genuine audio and video. And I think that could be significantly disruptive to future elections in U.S. politics, especially as more people who are not politically activated or not active in paying attention to politics could be, I think, swayed by some of this deceptive AI content.
Mm-hmm. All right. And then let's move on here to this energy topic. Robert, you've been talking about this for a couple of years now, about how going back to Obama and Biden, the Clean Power Plan 2.0, it was going to cause an energy crisis in this country. President Trump has issued all these executive orders trying to reverse all of those plans. And critics are saying this is nothing but a power grab. Is it really? And what's going on?
Well, what they're saying is a power grab is that in some of these executive orders, Trump is trying to circumvent the public comment period for these rule changes, because basically that public comment period could extend, actually change these rules out to a year timeline, a year plus timeline. And yeah, a lot of these legal scholars are saying that this is a power grab because he's trying to circumvent the Administrative Procedures Act. If the Supreme, one of these legal scholars did say that they think the Supreme Court would side with Trump and give him more leeway on these exemption, or going past this comment period, and that would actually open up all federal regulations to Trump rapidly repealing them. And I think if the Supreme Court did side with the Trump administration, he would significantly speed up executive branch reforms through these rule changes. Right now, I think the key here is Chief Justice John Roberts, but recently Roberts and 4 of the conservatives on the court did rule that Trump could continue deportations through the Enemy Aliens Act. And I think they could side with Trump on the use of effectively, there's this potential emergency. Trump could declare an emergency to get around the comment period on these. And I think they would side with him on that and circumvent the obstacle of the Administrative Procedures Act, which has been used heavily since the first Trump administration to tie him up in the courts.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Thanks for that, Robert. Let's go ahead and move on to the rest of our roll-ups, starting with Texas. ERCOT, which is our state level power grid for Texas, says power demand will double by 2031. Is there enough construction in the pipeline to meet this new power demand, Robert?
Well, I think that's what ERCOT is trying to get underway. So this is a new report from this week, And this is about peak power demand. And they said that the peak power demand could grow to 218 gigawatts by 2031, which is more than double the record from 2023 that was only 85 gigawatts of power demand. They did say that the peak power demand could come down slightly to only 145 gigawatts, which is still more than the Texas grid can handle right now, if they see a slowdown in a lot of these high energy demand projects. I think they're trying to get. I think that part of the intent of this report is to try to get more of these nuclear power and liquid natural gas power projects into Texas.
All right. Thanks for that, Robert. Let's bring Jared on, starting with these State Department sanctions of the Bank of Yemen. I guess this is intended to cut down on the Houthis. Why has this not happened sooner?
That's a great question that I couldn't find an answer to. But yes, this is to cut down, to disrupt the Houthis' financial networks and to eliminate, to eliminate Iran's threat network. Now, Japan is also seeking some additional assurances here. The defense minister told a press conference that the Japanese talks with the U.S. about tariffs would not affect the defense relationship. And he further added that he wouldn't be going to the negotiations in Washington. And I think this is important because there's been a lot of talk about, okay, well, we're going to lose allies over this. The ally right at the tip of the spear is saying absolutely not. The security is more important. We'll figure out, the issues with our friends. And China is making some moves down in South America. The Transportation Ministry and China's state railway group both met with Brazilian government officials to discuss a railway project that would link Brazil's farmland with the Peruvian port of Chancay. And I saw that it may go through Bolivia as well, which I think would eliminate a lot of the issues going through the Amazon.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is big because China's trying to get more direct access to Brazilian soybeans, for instance. Is that your read as well?
Yes. And so this would also allow them to circumnavigate the Panama Canal, which I don't see how, if things go really hot, I don't see how Chancay is allowed to continue. That becomes a national security threat for the United States.
Okay, you're saying that the United States is going to put diplomatic and other pressure on the government of Peru to shut down this Chinese port in Chancay?
Absolutely. I mean, it's just applying tyranny of distance going the other way.
All right. Seems plausible. All right, thanks, Jared. Let's go ahead and move on to our warning items. Starting off with mass mobilization, this is something I've followed for a while. I've talked a lot about Indivisible and 5051 and the other groups that are building this national protest movement. And I do think they have achieved their near-term goal, which is building sustained mass protests. There's going to be another one this weekend. What they call their signature event, their kind of first big national day of protest, happened on April 5th. Depending on estimates, they mobilized anywhere between 500,000 people up to 3 million people nationally. Indivisible said they got 5 million people nationally. I kind of doubt they mobilized 5 million, but that's what they said. And so I think by all accounts, that was a moderate success for these groups. Somewhere between 1,200 and 1,400 individual protest groups. And so a lot of these were small, 5, 10, a dozen, 20 people maybe showing up. But they also had some regional success, mobilizing in the low thousands in some pretty surprising places like Sioux Falls, South Dakota. There's another protest coming up this Saturday, a national day of protest. This is the 50-51 project, 50 protests, 50 states, one movement. I do think it's going to be smaller. I don't see a bunch of people getting on the bandwagon here. And some of these people even said it's too soon. Yeah, we just had one on the 5th. We don't need one on the 19th. They're going to run one on the 19th anyway. But I'll tell you, the next big day for mass mobilization is coming up on May Day. I think this is going to be big. I think it's going to be bigger than the 5th because unions are getting involved. More to follow on that. But for now, David Brooks, he's often touted as a conservative columnist over at New York Times. I doubt I would not call him a conservative. However, it appears to me like this mass mobilization protest stuff is starting to be mainstream just a little bit. David Brooks said that mass mobilization protests are the way to stop what he describes as President Trump's march to authoritarianism. He says, quote, "It's time for a comprehensive national civic uprising. It's time for Americans in universities, law, business, nonprofits, and the scientific community, and civil servants and beyond to form one coordinated mass movement. Trump is about power. The only way he's going to be stopped is if he's confronted by some movement that possesses rival power." And we're talking about social power here. Just as a little bit of background, Indivisible said they're running these mass mobilization protests, these national days of protest, for predominantly two reasons. Number one, to show Democrats that they have millions of supporters who want more hardline, more aggressive action against the Trump administration. And I do think they have achieved that goal. I think there are a lot of Democrats now who are spurred on. Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat from Connecticut, just last month said, maybe it was a mistake for us to go along with this continuing resolution, kind of implying like maybe Democrats won't go along with Republicans and the Trump administration for this debt ceiling deal that may still need to be hammered out. And he talked about risk. I played you that video when shortly after it came out, and he said Democrat leaders have to take more risks because eventually we're going to call on the rank and file. We're going to call on citizens to come out and take more risk. And if Democrat leaders are not taking risk, then it's not appropriate for asking them to do that. And Senator Murphy specifically, explicitly called for hundreds of thousands of people to move out into the street. This is exactly what David Brooks is calling for. And so I do think Indivisible is meeting that first goal. Now, the second goal of these mass mobilization protests, just the near-term goal, is to show Republicans, specifically vulnerable Republicans, that if they do not break with the MAGA movement, if they don't break ranks with the Trump administration, they are going to be the target of a huge push to vote them out of office. This all comes back to breaking the MAGA coalition, fracturing the MAGA coalition. There were, near as I could tell, there are 8 lines of effort for these progressive strategy calls that lasted from roughly November to January of this year. And there are 8 of them. Number 8 was breaking the MAGA coalition. So I think this is really what this is aimed at here. And David Brooks, if you go and read this, David Brooks actually does talk about this, about trying to piecemeal breaking off key figures from the Trump administration and the MAGA coalition. So bottom line here is this is being mainstreamed. I think is the protest movement has proven sustainability. It will continue. I think it's likely to grow. If we do have a mild or shallow recession this year, I think that's going to be an accelerator of low intensity conflict as well. Point being, I'm continuing to see development for mass mobilization protests. And this is very important because, we have the 4 phases of a color revolution. And the problem is building a mass mobilization movement is indistinguishable from the building blocks of a color revolution. So now that they have achieved sustainability for symbolic resistance, and these protests are toothless, but they are sustained, the next phase is to move into into direct action. And we have protests and we have direct action. Protest says we're going to go out here and march and hold signs and complain about stuff. And direct action says we are going to directly get involved in stopping these policies. So earlier this week, I talked about this lady on the Indivisible all call on Wednesday night. And she said, we want you to put your bodies on the line. Go to the airport. Go block a deportation plane. That's almost exactly what she said. That is direct action. And that is the next phase of this left-wing resistance movement. So it's very significant now. I think this is the mass mobilization stuff, mass political defiance is being mainstreamed here. All right, let's move on to the next item. All right, Robert. So you were checking out these websites this morning. So there are some climate center climate centers and websites, and they provide data to states about weather and climate issues?
Yeah, these are what are called under the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They're regional climate centers, and they have apparently the federal funding for these NOAA centers has lapsed as of yesterday. Though I did see the Northeast Center's website is still online. Right now, the National Weather Service and NOAA are undergoing significant staff cuts. Part of this is DOGE recommended staff cuts or imposed staff cuts, but part of it is also that there are a lot of these actual meteorological specialists retiring from the National Weather Service. So they're planning to, this is according to an internal document, to cut back services at 122 weather offices nationwide. And they're saying they're going to effectively be forced to provide what they're saying are degraded services. And the National Weather Service and NOAA are already severely understaffed. And right now they're set to lose 800 employees so far this year. And I think combined with the shutdown of these regional climate centers under NOAA and this National Weather Service shortages of specialized employees, there's going to be fewer eyes on severe weather, which I think is going to make state and local level preparations more difficult, because they're also talking about having to cut back on weather collection operations, like sending up weather balloons to detect severe weather and weather changes. Mm-hmm. And they're saying that is going to have to be cut back as well due to these staffing shortages.
Mm-hmm. All right. So yeah, that was my question. Is this smoke or fire? Are these centers telling people that Cal farts cause global warming, or is this actual critical weather information? It sounds like it's actually critical weather information. Did the Trump administration have they proposed any solution? Because I don't know. I like knowing when I have a tornado warning in my backyard.
I haven't seen yet the Trump administration responding to this. I think there's this, looking at the past DOGE cuts and then the Trump administration having to bring critical employees back, like at the Department of Energy. I think there's this dynamic where DOGE is going in and just trying to burn out these agencies effectively. And then the Trump officials, cabinet officials, like Energy Secretary Christopher Wright, and I think even Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has had to bring back key employees under his cabinet agency. They've gone back behind DOGE and rehired key employees. Like the Energy Department had to rehire staffers, I think out west, who were manning hydroelectric dams, hydroelectric power plants, because they were basically operating the power needs for millions of Americans, and they were just summarily dismissed. And then they had to go back behind DOGE and rehire hundreds of people to continue operating these hydroelectric power plants. Okay. So I expect something similar. I think that the Trump administration will probably do something similar here, is try to ramp up rehiring of non-administrative staff, like the actual meteorologists who conduct weather collections and analysis.
Mm-hmm. All right. Great point. Good to know. Thank you, Robert. Let's move on. I think we're going back to Yemen. All right. Yeah. So, Jared, bottom line up front here, you say the Chinese are deliberately providing targeting information or aiding in the targeting of U.S. ships by the Houthis in Yemen.
Yes, and that was coming right from State Department spokeswoman Tammy Bruce. There was a rumor, and then 45 minutes later, it was confirmed. And this is the company that's doing it is Changguang Satellite Technology Corporation. The reason that matters is that that's actually not a private company in any sense of the word. It runs out of the Chinese Academy of Sciences, which is a partner with the People's Liberation Army and is a state-run university. So this is a state-run company providing targeting data to the Houthis to shoot American and European warships.
Mm-hmm. Previously, you mentioned that the Houthis do not target Chinese ships. Correct.
Yep. They use AIS data to find out who's a Chinese crewed ship if it's not already Chinese flagged.
Okay, so if it's a Western flagged ship, shoot a missile at it. If it's Chinese, don't shoot a missile at it.
Yeah. Yeah, they start with interdiction, but end up shooting. Okay,
gotcha. All right. So bottom line here is there's been talk about I've seen some military analysts say this is not a problem that we can't just bomb our way out of. Like, we'll never be able to bomb the Houthis into not shooting missiles at U.S. ships. And so the next logical conclusion is, well, you got to have boots on the ground then to go in and target people. That's not popular. What is the actual solution here?
Well, so when looking at cutting off, sanctioning the Bank of Yemen and addressing, they're going to have to address this further. Tammy Bruce did say that the State Department has actually discussed this matter with Beijing directly, but nothing has been done. So they've known about this for a while. I would. I hesitate to say what I think would have to happen. I think there would have to be space. Basically, you interdict the information coming from space, and that either means jamming the satellite or destroying the satellite. And no matter how you look at that, that's an act of war. Or you convince the Chinese to stop, and it looks like convincing them is not working.
Yeah, I don't see a whole lot of reason why China would cooperate on this matter. All right. Thanks for that, Jared. And let's go ahead and get to your questions today. Jared, if you could please tee up some. Here, we got one right here. All right. In the event of a conflict with China, which nations should be most concerned about their food security, especially given China is a major exporter of fertilizer? Well, I go automatically to the drought-prone countries in the Middle East and North Africa. They got hit the hardest by the Ukraine wheat export problems back in 2022. They had big problems back in 2020 with commodities and supply chain destruction. Jared, off the top of your head, Robert, any other countries you would throw in there?
Probably some of the sub-Saharan African ones as well, though they tend to be pretty dependent on food aid. I did actually look. I had time to look this up prior to answering it, and even though China is a major exporter, they're actually not a major producer. Weirdly enough, like the bread baskets of the world seem to be insular in making fertilizer. So the U.S., Canada, Mexico, Russia, formerly Ukraine, all make a ton of fertilizer. And they pretty much provide food aid for everybody else. So it actually may not be as big of an issue as it looks like.
All right. Yeah, I guess the farther a country is from those bread baskets, there's a handful around the world, probably the greater at risk. All right. I hope that answers your question. Jared, what is the next question? There are many counterintuitive moments, such as protecting wasteful government spending, fighting a cure for autism, or finding a cure for autism, and fighting to retain foreign gang members. Do these have a common origin? I guess so. The counterintuitive. Robert,
I think it seems counterintuitive on its face, because a lot of people who would consider themselves conservative do want to cut wasteful government spending. They want to, they still want to have some medical research and want to deport a lot of foreign terrorist organization members. But I think the common origin here is protecting democratic and progressive patronage networks. A lot of, as we found out with USAID, there's a lot of money that comes, like tens of billions of dollars that comes out of USAID to domestic non-government organizations. And on the deportation front, I think part of this is that pro-immigration groups, especially progressive and Democrat organizations, I think they see Trump winning on deportations under the Alien Enemies Act as creating a crack in the defense of mass deportations. So it's like a maximalist fight for them. They need to push as much back as much as they can, because if they don't, then that opens the door for more deportations. And part of it is, I think we talked about this, there's a political strategy on the Democratic progressive side to effectively create a new voter base, with the idea that eventually these illegal immigrants that have been flown in under the parole programs through the CBP One app would have a path to citizenship, and then they would be placed in some of these key states that they want to at least turn purple, if not flip blue.
So I guess, Robert, building off what you said earlier, you fire everyone in the department because you can't do political litmus testing or ideological litmus testing. So you fire everybody and then you bring them back slowly once people, because the Trump administration they learned from the first term. You don't want leftists working in these positions where they can sabotage your policies. So that seems to be the most rational explanation, along with just cutting the federal budget. But I'm not going to take a victory lap here on this, but earlier this year, I asked everybody, is Doge, Elon Musk came out and said, we're going to cut $2 trillion from the budget. I said, is that I forget exactly what question I asked, but is that realistic? And I think pretty much all of us said, no, that's not realistic. And now it's down to 150 billion or something like that. All right. Thanks for that, Robert. Jared, please, next question. What laws prevent us from performing lawfare on individual federal agents?
It's the Federal
I
Tort
guess
Claims Act.
Yeah, I guess you could try to sue. I don't know.
Yeah, so what blocks people from suing individual federal employees is the Federal Tort Claims Act, and it requires you to go through a process to actually sue. And it's not even an individual agent or employee; it's the entire agency, and you have to submit a claim to the agency first to give them a chance to come up with a solution before you go to court. So I think the idea of there are a lot of these ways. A lot of these rules that have been set up prevent effectively lawfare on one side against federal overreach or politicization of these federal agencies. And yeah, you have to give them a chance to fix it before you can actually sue. So it takes off a lot of that lawfare pressure.
Mm-hmm. All right, thanks, Robert. Next question is: do you think 2028 or maybe 2032 will be a left pendulum swing that undoing all the reprieve we have felt from the leftist push? Feels like a pause, not a change. That's a distinct possibility. It's tough to say. I think if we can get through this next recession, if we do have a mild recession, I'll tell you the investment banks right now are pretty split. They have been raising their recession outlook. Right now, everything I'm seeing, they say markets are pricing in interest rates, bond markets are pricing in a mild recession. So if we do have a mild recession, I think the Republicans probably going to get wiped out in the midterms, at least in the House. And we'll see. This happened to Reagan. Reagan instituted a bunch of economic changes, and Republicans lost the midterms in Reagan's first term. But Reagan came back and won in a landslide because the economy was doing so well. And so everything I'm seeing from Trump, from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, they all say this is a years-long process. This is not going to be done in 18 months. And so maybe I can kind of see if this Trump strategy does work. You come in, you cut government regulation, you cut government spending, you move jobs as Elon Musk said, you move low and no productivity jobs from the government sector, and you move them to high productivity jobs in the private sector. It makes sense to me. I don't see why it can't work. If it does work, then maybe Republicans can hang on in 28. If it doesn't work, probably not. Next question here. All right, President Trump will drop efforts to clinch a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine in the absence of any clear signs of progress, Rubio said. What is the impact? Jared, Robert, I guess the impact is the war goes on.
Yeah, the war would continue, but honestly, I think this is just a negotiating tactic because for about 3/4 of the time since the ceasefire negotiations kicked off, Russia and Ukraine have been accusing each other of shooting each other's energy infrastructure, which is a no-go on it. I think what this is doing, or I think what the point of this is Rubio is telling them, guys, knock it off, get back to the table. We're going to figure this out. And if you don't, we'll leave and just let you guys do what you want to do.
Mm-hmm. On the drive back last night, I started listening to that Robert Mearsheimer book, How States Think. And he was going through and talking about, in the very beginning, he's going through and talking about how most people in the West, most U.S. officials looked at Russia's invasion of Ukraine as irrational. They said, he's crazy. He's a madman. He's a megalomaniac. He has these delusions of grandeur. He's going to reestablish the Russian Empire. And Mearsheimer goes through and he says, well, actually, this is very rational. And it comes down to a very simple but deliberate calculation. And so he makes that case. Robert, just looking at this, is it rational for Vladimir Putin? Mearsheimer says it was rational for Russia to invade Ukraine, even though it was going to be very costly, because Ukraine talking about joining NATO was a red line. And so that was the rationality behind it. Putin's not crazy. He had to do something to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO. And when he hears from U.S. officials slow walking, like Biden slow walking this, oh yeah, we're eventually going to put Ukraine in NATO. Putin does not want does not want that on his doorstep. And you don't have to like it, but that's just the realist view of what was happening. So is this rational for Vladimir Putin to end the war in Ukraine?
I think so, and that depends on what kind of agreement that Putin can actually get from the Trump administration and Ukraine. So How States Think is one of my favorite books. I like John Mearsheimer. He's a neo-realist, and he's been warning about the Ukraine-Russia situation since, I think, 1993, saying that this is, putting NATO encroaching up to Russia's doorstep after the fall of the Soviet Union was going to create exactly the situation. So the foundational idea that behind realism is that states, or at least as Mearsheimer puts it, is states are security seeking, and they're going to take actions based on how they perceive security and insecurity. And in his view, which I think is accurate, Russia viewed Ukraine joining the EU and possibly NATO as a detriment to their security. And so under that model, that states are security seeking, invading Ukraine was a rational decision. And I think his point in How States Think is that people fall into this irrational actor trap where whenever a state does something they don't like or agree with or doesn't fit their own objectives, they consider it irrational without considering what Russia's objectives actually were in this example. And I think in order to get a peace deal underway, the Trump administration is going to have to be able to guarantee to Russia that Ukraine, one, is not going to immediately turn around and start seeking NATO and EU membership again, and two, that Ukraine is not going to do that Kursk offensive again, or start or continue sending missiles and drones over the border to hit Moscow and other major cities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was what I got from the first couple of chapters as well. Is if U.S. officials said, "Oh, this is irrational," well, is it irrational because you don't like it, or is it irrational because it really is a suboptimal course of action? And it seems like Putin's decision was optimized for national survival. All right, thanks for that. Do you see the administration replacing some of the federal workforce with AI? It is a possibility. I'll tell you, I think more important than replacing the federal workforce with AI, if we do go through a recession and people do get laid off, I think AI is going to replace a lot of jobs. And I think a recession is probably going to be the first hitch in AI replacing jobs. These companies will simply not bring them back. They'll hire a team of AI engineers. And, my best friend's an attorney, and he said, Mike, Chat GPT and whatever the legal versions of Chat GPT are, he said, this is going to enable one attorney to do the work of probably 4 or 5 attorneys. And that's what I see happening. Robert, have you seen anything from Elon Musk about bringing AI online inside the federal government?
What I've seen so far, they're trying to do basically use AI programs to look for places where they can cut spending in these federal agencies. But I've seen some pushback from Democrats saying, like, hey, you can't connect these AI models to sensitive computer systems, sensitive networks and computer systems to go through all this data because that creates vulnerabilities. But I haven't seen anything about replacing actual federal employees with AI models yet.
All right. Yeah, it's funny. Robert, did you see that there's some legal case, and the attorney in the legal brief or whatever he had to give the judge, it contained non-existent legal cases because he used Chat GPT that hallucinated these cases that did not exist, and it really irked the judge. I thought that was funny. Not funny for that guy, or I guess if it's your case.
Yeah, and that actually probably set back AI use in the courts for years. That happened a couple of years ago, and now I think I think we reported on a couple of weeks ago the federal courts are considering now trying to use AI to try to help with the huge caseload backlog they have, but they're really hesitant because of exactly that situation. Apparently, that's a very infamous case in the legal world where it hallucinated a bunch of legal precedents that just didn't exist, and really that really hurt that law firm.
Mm-hmm. All right, Robert, briefly regarding AI data centers, many states have used coal plants, and those coal plants have been shut down. They're now experiencing a power shortage. Just briefly, President Trump can talk all he wants about reindustrializing. We're going to build these factories and new manufacturing hubs. There are AI data centers right now with 2-year delays in construction. They can't even start building this thing yet because there's not enough power. There's not enough power being generated to run this AI data center. And we can look at domestic steel manufacturing and all the other things that we're going to need. If we don't have the juice and we don't have the structural steel to build these factories, there is no reindustrialization of the United States. I just want to point that out. And I have not seen any kind of credible plan from the Trump administration to say, here's how we're going to ramp up manufacturing of steel. Here's how we're going to ramp up all the things that we need. However, with heavy power needs from these AI data centers, is bringing coal power, I guess the question is bringing coal power back the solution?
I think that's one direction the Trump administration is going with that executive order a couple of weeks ago. The idea of trying to keep these coal power plants profitable so they'll stay open. A part of that is rolling back some of the emission standards that were imposed by the Biden administration. And I mean, this has been a long time war, just on the coal subject specifically. This has been a long time war between Democrats and in the energy sector, going back to, I think, Obama explicitly said he is starting a war on coal, trying to make it more and more expensive. As far as a realistic way forward on the energy side, I think the Trump administration is doing what is possible from the federal government. Like they're trying to create incentives to stop these coal power plants from closing, trying to get more liquid natural gas power plant construction. But like you said, one of the major holdups is AI data centers, and they are gobbling up all of this future projected energy growth. But that might change because as I think with ERCOT said, like if we see a slowdown in construction, which is already happening, some of these AI data centers have been delayed, that would lower the growth projection, but they're still going to gobble up a lot of that future power generation growth. I think some of the other things that the Trump administration Trump really doesn't like wind power, but he hasn't been as hard on solar. So I don't think they're really going after solar power. They're taking what they're calling an all of the above approach. And I'm actually kind of optimistic about the small modular reactor thing because they seem to be picking up speed, and more like I think we're now on track to get a commercial or an operational small modular reactor. I think it was starting in 2027, which would put us much further ahead than I think people were talking about a year ago.
Mm-hmm. All right. On this rational actor thing, if Trump does abandon a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine, you see this conflict is spilling over into Western Europe. If you ask Western Europe, they say yes. If you ask Russia, the Russophiles on Twitter, they say, no, that's insane. That would be irrational. Putin would not go into the Baltics. I don't know. I don't have an opinion either way, but Robert or Jared, I guess, Robert here, the Mearsheimer argument would be that I think maybe that it would be irrational. Do you see Russia going into the Baltics? If you ask the Baltics, they say, yes, it's like 3 to 4 years away. They're going to invade us. What say you?
I can't say whether Russia would consider it, a security issue to continue pushing on into Western Europe. I think based on what has happened since the fall of the Soviet Union and Putin taking power in 1998, 99, I don't expect to see a major Russian invasion of Western Europe. I don't think that the Western Europe and Eastern Europe elite's opinions are necessarily irrational. I think they're genuine about their concerns of falling under the Russian sphere of influence, which would, is why they're doing this turn to defense production and everything, which ties back into this whole idea of putting up a wall between the rest of the world and China economically, because there's a lot of talk about Europe siding with China. I think there was, I forget the guy's name, a couple weeks ago. He's a major economist in Europe that said that there's a scenario where Europe and China could join sides to keep up the global trade order. I don't think that's likely, because China, that would mean Europe is joining China in that Russia-China no limits friendship. If they're actually concerned about Russia, they're not going to want to side with China, who is helping Russia, and also undercutting a lot of Europe's economy. Like, I think there was that whole thing over British steel recently, to the point that like the UK Navy is talking about having to escort I forget the exact term, but it's a type of coal that's used for creating steel, and China's threatening not to ship it, which would burn that furnace out and they wouldn't be able to restart it. So there's a lot of interaction going on right now between Europe and China that is actually, I think, going to be affected by Europe's view on Russia.
It sure seems to me like a EU-China relationship is like the Aesop's fable of the frog and the scorpion. It would be terminal for Europe, I think, in the long run. All right, last question here is regarding the Houthis in China. Who do you see, or what do you see as the likely actions going forward? It's not unlike the U.S. giving targeting info to Ukraine. Jared, you talked a little bit about it seems to me like we have pretty limited courses of action. If we can't bomb them enough to make them stop, and if we can't stop the shipments from Iran supplying the Houthis, but although you mentioned Houthi, didn't you say the Houthis have their own pretty advanced domestic drone manufacturing capability?
Yes, they have a domestic one that's basically just a copy of Iran's, which Iran's is a copy of China's. So that's another interesting piece, which I don't think gets enough attention. Is essentially you have third-hand Chinese missiles being targeted with Chinese satellites firing at American ships. Yeah, there's a lot there. I think the most likely course of action is probably ramping up this trade war. Like it seems to be the preferred method of action right now, is hurt them economically. Don't let them come back out or don't let them manufacture their way out of it, as Scott Besson said. So that's probably the way that we're going to go, with the understanding that this is technically a casus belli. Like, I don't think there's any way around it. And yes, it is very much like the U.S. potentially giving targeting info. I don't think that ever got confirmed, though, where this is the U.S. government saying the Chinese government is targeting us.
Yeah. Well, I think it's impossible that Ukraine is firing off HIMARS without U.S. assistance. There's just a 0% chance of that, I think. All right. Well, that's going to do it for today's early morning briefing. It's also going to do it for this week. Everyone, thanks so much for watching. Thanks for your questions. And we do this every day, Monday through Friday, if you're a new viewer. If you'd like to get access to our report, we do publish a daily report, in addition to special reports and information sharing all throughout the day. You can get that at earlywarningnetwork.com. Sign up for a free 7-day trial. With that, everyone, have a great Easter weekend. And we'll be back in your inbox on Monday, back on the show starting at 08 Central Time. Until then, be well and stay out front.